that the Philippines is the only country in Southeast Asia who is standing up against China in the entire South China Sea. He admitted the fact that among the Southeast countries, it is only the Philippines who is standing up against bullying and lawful activities of the People's Republic of China.
Apply to the South China Sea, but as you know, China is in history a land power and not a sea power. And when we talk about the international law, especially on the UNCLOS, and there are many different interpretations about some article. So maybe some difference about this interpretation will leading the dispute how to define the international law. And just my personal view is very simple, and maybe it's just lasting the very long time, and we didn't find a way to apply international law to the South China Sea.
I think there's no problem about the interpretation of the international law. Everybody, if you can ask anyone about the provisions about the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, all of us would agree on the articles and for each parts of the UNCLOS. But the problem in the South China Sea is not all about the interpretation. As I said, it is as clear as the sky. It is not subject to your own personal interpretation. The problem in the South China Sea, the reason why there is an escalation of tension, it's because there are some countries who choose to interpret it differently. They have an alternative interpretation of each provision of each articles in UNCLOS. And at the same time, it is also coupled with their own capability, whether economically, whether militarily, and that is the problem. If you believe on your own interpretation without actually respecting the provisions of international law, that would definitely result to the escalation of tension.
Would I just mention one thing, and the core issue of the South China Sea dispute, not only is maritime law, is just the core is a dispute of the island territorial sovereignty. And you know, the UNCLOS, the contemporary in the law of the sea, that's the maritime right come from the land. If we just discuss the maritime dispute and just didn't mention about the land, island territorial dispute, I don't think we find the real way to solve the dispute. And so, and when we talk about the South China Sea issue, we didn't want to come from an international law to solve all these issues. And all these island territorial dispute must be solved by some bilateral country. But you know that there are many islands not only overlapped by two countries and multilateral. So all these in the island territorial dispute maybe not only come from the law of the sea can solve that problem.
You know, I came from a South China Sea conference in Vietnam, and there is this, I won't mention the nationality of one of the panel members that I had, and he said that the Philippines is the only country in Southeast Asia who is standing up against China in the entire South China Sea. He admitted the fact that among the Southeast countries, it is only the Philippines who is standing up against bullying and lawful activities of the People's Republic of China. So your question is, how can we have ASEAN to consider this security challenge if the Philippines will only be one, all alone, exposing the Chinese aggression? I think I agree with our Vietnamese friend. The problem with South China Sea is that all the countries in South Asia, I think the main problem the South China Sea, particularly in Asia, is that we fail to understand really how are we going to respond with the unlawful and aggressive action of one country that jeopardizes the regional security in Asia. We are always left with two options, whether we're just going to ignore Chinese aggression or we're going to respond. And for so many years already, the ASEAN regional countries would just choose to ignore. And unfortunately, fortunately, under this administration for President Marcos, we choose to expose. We're not responding, we're not provoking anybody. We're just telling the world that there is unlawful activities that are happening in the South China Sea, neither ignoring nor responding. And for other Southeast Asian countries to realize that, I think that is something that we can have as a first step. It's because it is unfortunate that when we choose to be transparent about the South China Sea, although we think about the regional security, people have this wrong notion that it's only the Philippines that is only being subjected to harassment and unlawful activity. But to be fair with our Brunei, Vietnamese, Malaysian friends, they are all aware that whatever harassment that we are experiencing within our own exclusive economic zone, it's pretty much the same. Ray Powell has always been using his social media platform to expose all those incursions within their own exclusive economic zone. The problem is, when is ASEAN also going to do the same?
Someone, maybe you just mentioned that China is aggressive or the bully to Philippines. But from Chinese policy, and I think from the 2012, and China didn't do some very more aggression or operation in the South China Sea, because all this status quo from Chinese side is maintained. There's no more island building and there's no more island occupation. But from the Philippine side, there's more and more military exercise with the US, with Japan, with the Australian foreigner. There's 1 year that 500 times military joined the exercise with the US in the Philippines. Wow, it's a huge number. And if you trace the US surveillance and reconnaissance airplane in the South China Sea, I can tell you the 1 year is 1,200 times. So all this operation, I don't think can bring the very good atmosphere to solve the South China Sea dispute. And why the Philippines and the extra president, so we have a very good relationship and to solve the dispute and set aside the dispute and just promote the economic development. So why something have changed because 2 years ago? So if we just sitting here tonight to talk about the future to solving the South China Sea dispute, and we must tracing back the history and not just cast China as an adversary.
I want to put a pin. Go ahead.
Thank you, my Chinese friend. But I would like really to thank you because this is your second time to go to Manila Dialogue, right? But, let us first correct some of the statements that you said. Starting 2012 onwards, the Philippines never occupied any maritime features since we signed the 2002 DOC. And let me refresh your history. In 1992, when the US bases left the Philippines, 3 years after that, you took over Mischief Reef. That is the reason why the Estrada administration during that time had run aground a commissioned vessel, BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin. Because there was also an intelligence report that it's not just in Mischief Reef that you will end your occupation, it will actually crawl in other different maritime features. Fast forward in 2012, there was a standoff when the PLA maritime forces never want the Philippine Navy to arrest your illegal fishermen who are capturing endangered species in Bajo de Masinloc. From 2012 onwards, the Chinese Coast Guard and maritime forces never left there, wherein you continuously and persistently harass Filipino fishermen. You said about data wherein we had a lot of engagement with the United States military, but let me refresh your memory during the time of the former administration. From 2016 to 2022, during the time of the former administration, in his first few days in office, he He was not actually a fan of a military exercise with that of the US government. So meaning, there is a substantial decrease of number, if not nil, with our engagement with the U.S. military. But despite of our good intention of sincere diplomacy under President Duterte, going to Xi Jinping, discussing about resolving our disputes, we have been still receiving reports from ordinary Filipino fishermen that they are continuously being harassed. Our supply operations remains to be very difficult for the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and our small Coast Guard vessels, which is almost triple the size of a China Coast Guard vessel, is also continuously being bullied since then and now, since during the day one that it was delivered from Japan. The Philippine government has always showed signs of good intentions and good faith. We never provoke anyone. We never wanted to escalate the tension. Coast Guard vessels in the Philippines are so small compared to the Chinese Coast Guard. It is not our intention to provoke the Chinese government. Well, first of all, I think it's important for us to understand that the Philippines is not putting all our eggs in one basket with the United States. And this is not, the decision of the Philippines to stand up against the aggression of any other country without
You
mentioning,
have to hold it closer.
without mentioning in particular country. The decision of the Philippine government to stand up for anybody who is violating our sovereignty and sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea is not all about great power competition. It doesn't mean that we're siding with the United States or we're siding with the People's Republic of China. This is not about those kind of choices. It is all about our state agency as a sovereign nation. And looking at the external countries like Canada, Australia, European Union, France, Germany, they are not also supporting the Philippines because we are siding with the United States. I would like to believe that all of these countries, that they were able to deepen their security arrangement with the Philippine government, support the capability development of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard. This is not all because we sided with the United States, but because they support the rules-based order. They support the international law. And that is the reason why we should stop looking at the South China Sea issue as something that is only a result of the great power competition.
Captain Liu, I would guess you're going to disagree with that, huh?
Yes. When we talk about the outer space and outer power, they want to take a very important role in the South China Sea issue, but my personal view is that the South China Sea issue is an issue between our coastal states. Our coastal states have an equal position, not only the ASEAN, just only the China, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. All these coastal states have finally solved this dispute. The outer space and the outer power, US, Japan, Australia, they come, they go, but the problem is still here. All these island disputes, maritime disputes, only can finally solved by our bilateral or multilateral by these coastal states. And how do you think the U.S. will play the role in how to solve the dispute with the Scarborough Shoal between China and Philippines? I don't think so. I don't think it's a very positive way. Yeah.
One for the China's representative on the stage. ASEAN and China has been talking to each other for 35 years since 1990, but as they talk, China keep building military bases in the South China Sea. So based on my conversation with ASEAN defense and intelligence officials, there is a strategic mistrust from within ASEAN against China. How can then China build strategic trust with ASEAN member states? Thank you.
I don't think the China's policy is just the take off all the foreign sea power out of the South China Sea. And until right now, the China didn't want to the U.S., Japan, Australia, some great sea power just put in a very negative factor or put the atmosphere is very negative to solve the South China Sea dispute. As China want to solve this dispute, land, island dispute, maritime dispute, just a bilateral negotiation and multilateral negotiation with some coastal states, not but there's no room for the outside state power just to participate on this negotiation of the dispute. I think that's a Chinese policy.
I would like to respond to the question about my aspiration for the code of conduct. I'd like to support the Vietnamese friend. I think it's important for us to have a COC that can be binding to all the signatory states. Otherwise, it will just be like the arbitral award, wherein some people would say it cannot be enforced. So if we're going to come up with a COC that will hold anybody accountable if you choose to violate it, I think that's the most effective way that we can be able to maintain regional peace in the South China Sea. Well, for the one lesson, I think we need to recognize that for us to be able to work on the regional peace and security is that for everybody to understand its responsibility to the treaties that we sign. The power of the international law can just be ignored if we are not going to be responsible to stand up for it. For the recommendation, having this kind of track 1.5 dialogue, not just here in the Philippines, but even in other parts of ASEAN, is very important. Because through this kind of dialogue, we can present our facts. Even if you're going to present your lies, the audience will be able to counter that. And the problem with the disinformation and fake news is really tremendous right now. So if we're going to have more track 1.5 dialogue, wherein we can bring along expert communities, the academic, the civil society, and the diplomat, we can already tell what is the truth, and that there is no alternative for the truth. Thank you.
Yeah, I have. And I just want to mention the one lesson that UNCLOS is very important and for all the country. But you must know the UNCLOS is nothing about the island disputes and sovereignty. If we were to try to solve the dispute with the Scarborough Shoal and the Spratley Island, we didn't find article in the UNCLOS. That's one point. The second is UNCLOS is just comprised of a member of 119 members and 160 members, and so the South China Sea is very distinguished. We didn't find any very specific article to solve the problem of the South China Sea issue. As the 1982 UNCLOS signed, the half a decade, half a century have passed, and almost some issue have changed. We must get the development of the UNCLOS or some article. So, yes, we must just based on the UNCLOS, but we must find some bilateral or multilateral treaty in the South